Welcome to the Politics Chicks podcast. I'm Monica Healy.
And I'm Christy Branham.
Today we're talking with someone whose work has quietly become an organizing lifeline for a whole lot of people trying to stay engaged and informed.
Kae Starling is the creator of We the People Dissent, a Substack that tracks protests and civil resistance actions around the country with maps, links, photos, context, the whole thing. If you've ever wondered how do people even find these events, there's a decent chance Kae helped answer that question.
She's also an indie author, a mom, and someone navigating what it means to raise a deaf child in a country where support systems can vary wildly depending on where you live.
We're going to be talking about organizing, exhaustion, hope, activism, Vegas, the sphere, and probably a little survival psychology.
Okay, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show, Kae.
I'm so glad to be here.
Let's start with both an easy question and a difficult question, because whenever you see somebody and they say, "How are you?" it depends on who you're talking to, how you answer that, right? So how are you?
I have an ability to be resilient that I think is a character trait of mine that usually serves me well. So good. With a caveat, I always feel like there's always like a caveat. I'm really upset about, I know this will come out in the future, but in today's time, we just saw that Tennessee was changing their maps. So that obviously is weighing on me. And in my own town, we're fighting a data center, and it feels like everything we do falls on deaf ears. So there is also that. But I also have lots of good things related to left of school. And so I am excited for that. It's a little bit of both.
You started as a writer and an independent author. And at what point did you realize that you were accidentally becoming a citizen journalist?
Sure. So I actually have a small background in journalism. One of my first jobs right out of high school was working for our local town newspaper. It doesn't exist anymore, but that kind of got my foot in the door. Did a little bit of writing throughout much of my life. Started doing some ghostwriting a few years ago and then decided to publish my own book independently. I love that. But then basically what happened was I love a good spreadsheet and a good map. And I have a strong background in volunteer organization. And after Trump won a couple of years ago now, I said, I'm going to sign up for all of these things and I'm going to do something. And then I felt overwhelmed because there were 12 emails in my inbox and half of them were asking for donations and the other half. It didn't seem like anybody actually had anything for me to do. So I decided, it was a Threads prompt, and I just said, if somebody took all of these things and put them on one list, would you subscribe to that? And the response was instantaneous. And so I was like, I guess I'm doing that. And it just launched. And thankfully, Jeff Craven, who writes Chocolate Cherry Water, mentioned me fairly early on, and that kind of helped with things. And then I fell into doing numbers because I was frustrated that the protests were spread across multiple platforms. I was like, okay, we need one list because this must be done. And it over time evolved and eventually started covering the stories because news stations only want to tell the stories of the big protests. And so I was like, what about the day-to-day? Little Burlington, Massachusetts, or South Burlington in Vermont. Who's going to tell that story? So I decided to tell that story.
Tell people a little bit about your Substack, because I stumbled on it a little over a year ago, and I actually shared a lot of your content on our Substack because it was so invaluable as a resource for people to see what was happening on a day-to-day basis or on a weekly basis. For our listeners that don't know, tell us about that Substack.
So every single week there is one that goes out that is, I call it the list. And so in that is going to be your big national campaigns that are coming up. I like to take the information and simplify it into bullet points because I love the website. I think they're great, but sometimes it's like a hunting game to find out all the information. And so I take and I real bullet point those out. And then I also do things like if there was a really great article that I saw, maybe highlighting how you can help with the midterms. I might highlight that. Or if I heard Indivisible is about to do a big training on how to observe ICE in your community, I might put a link in there. And then there's also a list and a map and links to every single state and ways that you can get involved there. So that's one bit. And then throughout the week, I write stories about people in every single town that I can talk to. It doesn't matter the size of your protest. I think I've talked about people who have been protests of a handful, and I've written stories on protests of 100,000, trying to just tell the stories of the people and cover what's happening and how people can get involved to try and build hope, really.
Your Substack really is invaluable. And you mentioned, I think it was this last week, that you led a protest about a data center and there were 8 of you, correct?
Yeah. Woo! Yeah.
So tell us more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So we're out here in Southern Nevada, and data centers obviously are all across the country and are a thing. And unfortunately, in Nevada, we are one of the states with the least amount of water. And yet they really think it's a great idea to put these massive data centers that require hundreds of thousands of gallons of water and
Yes. And pollute the environment when the water goes back into the
Yeah.
environment
and
too.
they're trying to build one out here. And in particular, they're trying to build one in what would be the watershed area for the Colorado River and Lake Mead. Clearly, we should all be concerned, I feel, about that, because the Colorado River then goes into California, and that's how we water our fruits and vegetables. And so for me, we should be concerned about it everywhere. But that is one thing. People are like, oh, just put in the desert. Nobody cares about the desert. Well, that's none of that is. Everybody just thinks, oh, desert. But in this place in particular, this is part of the watershed area for those two environments. And so we're trying to push back. Our city council is not listening. And so we're doing what we can to try and get them to listen and hopefully overwhelm them with the voices in our community.
Yeah, because those city councils and the planning commissions are the ones who stand as a bulwark between the government and the corporations and these data centers that are going up, right? So it's all about local government and trying to get those people to understand how important this is for the community. Which is why Monica and I talk about the fact that local elections are so important, and people will oftentimes, if it's not a big election year, they will skip going to the polls. But those local elections, those people that you elect to your school board, your city commissions, your city councils, planning commissions, all those positions are just as important, if not more important, because they have a daily impact on your
Oh,
life.
absolutely. And I think we're seeing that now. I feel like I've lived in a town that kind of is a little sleepy. People have largely ignored what's been going on in the town council. I obviously wouldn't have heard about this, except for there's a lovely group of people who attend every city council meeting, and they raised the alarm, and they were just kind of trying to slide it in there. Now they didn't want there to be a hoopla, and so now we're starting to make a little bit of a hoopla. So.
Well,
Hooplas are good.
I think there's a trend that way where there are more people that are becoming aware of some things that are happening and more people that are becoming civically engaged. And with how you compile all of your protests, are you seeing more of that? I'm assuming that you are seeing just a growth in the number of weekly, daily protests and whatnot, correct?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most encouraging things that I get to do is I get to see the growth on a very week-to-week, month basis. So there's a couple other groups that collect some data, but the benefit of collecting it real time and then constantly being aware of it is that you get to see patterns emerge and you get to see growth happen. And before October's No Kings, we were averaging around 650 to 700 protests a week. There would be the big pushes. You'd see that get a little big sometimes, but that was a fair average. And then we have No Kings, and then October, and we saw it go up to more like 800. And it was like, oh, this is exciting. We're like in the 800s. And then January, particularly after a native death, and that actually caused another massive spike to around 1,200. And throughout April now, April averaged 1,400 protests a week across the United States. Now, I would say, I always say this with a caveat. There are more happening than what I'm capturing. These are the ones who are publicly advertising. These are the ones who have a page or a website. For every protest I capture, there are little protests happening, organized on Signal, organized just some group in a community that doesn't have a website or maybe a private page. So there's more happening than that. But in the ones we can actually put on paper, that's what's happening. So that we see a lot of growth, big towns, small towns, and also a lot of more repeating protests. It used to be you would sometimes see they would be sprinkled maybe every week. But now it's more like 2 and 3 times a week. Or on Mondays, we're on this corner. On Wednesdays, we're on this corner. So that's also been growth. I think I reported about 65% protests are repeating protests.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You and I are soulmates when it comes to spreadsheets because I love me a good spreadsheet. Ask Monica. I drive her crazy with my spreadsheets.
No, I appreciate your spreadsheets. I appreciate that you make them.
I love spreadsheet.
Um,
I'm like, oh, yes, what we could put this in a spreadsheet.
But this is like a massive amount of information you're dealing with. So if you did not have spreadsheets, you would not be able to reel in the beast and actually get this off the ground. So why don't you walk us through the process a little bit about how does someone even begin compiling a nationwide
Sure.
protest information
Sure.
every week without losing their
So
mind?
I started doing it on my own and realized that was a terrible idea. And so I actually reached out to people on Substack and said, would anybody want to help? It's every, a few hours every other week. So I have about 10 people who go 5 one week, 5 the next, and they give a couple hours, and we split the list, and we say out A through California and Colorado through, I think, down to Maine or Massachusetts. And so we split up that list, and they mostly handle Mobilize. So Mobilize is where the majority of the protests are advertised. Indivisible makes it so that every indivisible group can post on there. But a lot of other groups too use that platform as well. But that's not the only place. So they do mostly that one. And they also help with Tesla Takedown. That used to be a big one. They've really waned a little bit over the past year. I then have about 75 websites or Facebook pages that I pull from. Now, some of these are just, they have one protest a week, and I just go on there and I make sure they haven't canceled. And it was real simple. And other ones like Activate Maine. Activate Maine is just a beast by itself. I think they have 100 protests a week, and they're all on Activate Maine. And so I have to go through.
Don't mess with Mainers,
No.
man. They take their shit seriously out there.
I'm like, oh my, I didn't even know these towns existed. And they are, and it is one app. I just have to make sure that they're all in there every week. And so, yeah, that's how I keep tabs on things. And then sometimes I will just hear about a new group and I'll find their site. I'll add it to the list. So it's really going through and just seeing, has anybody added anything? Another big place that does that is the Kansas City area. There's a website that handles a lot of theirs. Same with Indianapolis. Neither of those are often mobilized. And so that's how I keep track of them.
You have mentioned before about how it is easier to find protests now than it was like a year ago, and you're going to maybe take your focus elsewhere. Is that correct?
So I want to always be because like nobody else is doing that in real time. A crowdfunding consortium releases their data usually a couple months later or a month later. I don't find that I'd have a different set of data than what they are pulling from sometimes. There's a lot of overlap in our data, but I have about 1,000, 2,000 more per month. And so I want to continue to maintain that. You also are able to notice shifts. So like I was able to notice the student movement protest shift happening, or Citizens Bank, and was able to talk about that. But yeah, I want to continue to tell the story of, I want to get more and more into telling stories of the small towns, into creating networks and of regions and things like that, because I feel like, again, their stories just aren't being told. And so people think nothing's happening. We're actually a lot happening. Like, again, there are 1,300 protests this week. So there is a lot happening. I want to make sure that all of those stories get told, because I feel like there's encouragement, hope, and ingenuity and creativity. There's some really creative things happening. And so I want to make sure that those ideas get out there too.
So I was at the CD8 convention last weekend where they nominated Trina Swanson to run against Pete Stauber. They endorsed her. And I had never been to a convention like that before. First of all, democracy is very boring when you're in the middle of it, because it was an 8-hour day of sitting around all day, to be honest with you. That all the important votes, everything was important, but the big vote for the congressional candidate was at the end of the day. But one thing I noticed was that the people there were real people. There was a guy there that, like, you would think he looked quote unquote MAGA to me because he had the beard and was dressed like a farmer. And he was so proud because he had his vest on. All the people working for the DFL had their like worker vests on that were fluorescent so we could identify them quickly. And people don't understand that is where democracy starts. That is the basis of democracy. So when you're talking about focusing on these small towns, you're talking about that guy who spent his entire day volunteering to work to get the candidate nominated who would best represent the area. You're talking about all of the delegates who show up, who are everyday people who ranged in age. I saw, but they were very young delegates. There was also a woman who was in a wheelchair who looked like she was like 90 years old. And I loved seeing her there because it really went across the spectrum. So my guess is you want to tell these stories,
absolutely.
right? These people.
Because I think that there's hope. And there's so many reasons people get involved. And I think that's important too. But I think there's actually, we talk about, we look at the midterms and we look further out. But I think there's such an underestimation happening in the fact that we have well over 3,000 groups who are regularly organizing. To me, that's 3,000 groups that can be mobilized out to do things to combat maybe a data center, that can go and advocate for a candidate, that can flyer in their community, that can hold a workshop. That's actually incredibly powerful. And I think we are significantly underestimating the power of that. And to watch the places where you would not expect it to happen and grow. So I've been really encouraged by Utah. Utah is incredibly conservative and gerrymandered. They are fighting tooth and nail to let Salt Lake have its own voice. They have cracked that city into 4 parts. They do not want them to have it. The people voted. They said, they let Salt Lake have it. The state government will not let them. They're trying to fight this at every turn. But it's been encouraging to see they have the Utah Overpass group that is out there on the overpasses. And they are now actively protesting a ICE detention center in the Salt Lake Valley. But that is also exciting. Then I also see this town called Kanab. And if you've never been to the Southwest, you don't even know what Kanab is. And even if you grew up there, you probably still don't know what Kanab is, because it is a one grocery store and a hay store town in the middle of the desert. And we have protests. Or I'll see up in Montana, I would call Montana the dark horse of the resistance, because if you look at population and the number of protests they pull on No King's Day, it is 30 protests. I was like, how many towns are in Montana? I don't even know. And they pulled 30 protests on No King's Day.
There's more cattle in Montana than there are people, I think.
I mean, I've driven through Montana. And there's not a lot. There's a lot of farming and a lot of rural communities, but there's people organizing. And that's also so encouraging. That's why I think we've got to keep these stories and record them and let people know that they're happening.
I would agree that I think it's really impactful to be part of one of those huge protests. And I have been in Minneapolis and St. Paul, where we had 100,000 at No Kings in October and 70,000 when it was 40 frickin' below in January, and then 200,000 at the latest No Kings in March. But there's something really powerful about seeing the lone protester with a sign on a corner by themselves, or 5 people, because you can tell how firmly they believe in what they're doing. They don't care if they aren't surrounded by 100,000 people. They believe strongly in that this is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Those images are so powerful, right? Of that lone woman who looked like she was in her 70s. I can't remember what state it was in, but it was all over the internet, where she was standing firmly planted on her corner with her No King sign. Just seeing, and I think that shows people that you don't have to be in a big city and you don't need to be part of a big protest to be part of the movement, because this is a movement, right? This is not just a series of events. This is an ongoing living thing that you're harnessing here with your reporting and website.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that there's so many ways to be involved. And I would even argue that we need to continue to have our corner protests, but move into other forms of dissent that are a little bit more targeted. And those are things we need to continue to do. And so that's why it doesn't have to look the same everywhere. It shouldn't look the same. I would argue it shouldn't look the same everywhere. We can borrow ideas. And I really believe that if we ever want to have a national boycott or a national strike, we actually should start local. Because most historic boycotts and strikes started they're often named after a town, because they started in a town and they grew beyond that city into regions. And so the regional alliances are also really important. And some areas have done those really well. There's a few states in particular, Maine, North Carolina, the Kansas, Missouri corridor, there. Arizona, your Phoenix and Tucson area has done a really great job with working together, and then California, Oregon, and all those. So I just think we got to continue to about that. But I love them too. There's one that always sticks out in my mind from the first No Kings. It was Concrete, Washington. And Concrete, Washington, in the mountains that divide the state in half. It is, again, it is a town you would drive through. And the only reason I know it's there is because they have these giant silos with the word concrete painted across them. And there were 8 people in Concrete, Washington. And I thought that was amazing and really encouraging. Because when you're in a town of 1,000 people and you stand out on your main corner, that's a lot. I feel like that's a certain kind of bravery, because the people you do business with
Yes,
are going to
absolutely.
pass by you. And we go
Yeah.
see them on Monday. And it's a very bold stand.
And we are such a big country. And as you said, things are going to look different in different parts of the country. And Christy and I have endured Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota, but you are from the Southwest, which you mentioned earlier before. We don't hear a ton about Nevada in our national news. So talk to us about what that's like, because it's a swing state, but we're not hearing a whole lot about it right now. So what's the political atmosphere right now?
We have a Republican governor who is a Trump loyalist, and he was caught on a live mic talking about the protesters like we were paid and really mocking us. And then there's this weird thing is that you have Southern Nevada, which is Las Vegas, which if California and Arizona got together, that's what Southern Nevada. There's a lot of culture crossover from a true Southwest as well as the true California. I would even say from Utah, because we have a lot of the LDS influence in Southern Nevada. So it's this weird little melting pot. We're not very politically active as a city. City of, I feel like it's approaching 3 million. That's probably at least 2.5 or something. And people just kind of go about their daily lives. I feel like the things that impact us most and impact us differently are the tourism industry. One person said that Las Vegas is the canary in the coal mine of when the economy is taking a downturn because it hits us first. And we saw the downturn in tourism last February. We've known what's happening now was coming. First, then because international tourism started to dry up, the conferences started to go away. The tips, people, they just had less discretionary spending, so they're not going to come to Vegas if they have one. So that's
Well, no tax on tips isn't really going to be a benefit if you're not making tips, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't really, and that's a lot of what drives the economy here, is that entertainment and the tourism industry. There's other things too. It's become a robust study in a lot of other ways. But, and then of course, now we're facing data centers and the lack of water. The lake out here is at record lows, which affects the output from Hoover Dam, which provides a lot of power to the city and the region. And we don't get snow melt the way other places do.
Yeah.
It really has impacted people. And so that's actually waking up some people. But it's very encouraging to see even Las Vegas begin to come into its own and begin to get more civically engaged. We also face the hard things. We don't have our downtown is the tourism corridor, and we avoid that like the plague. And so we actually don't have a free speech zone that's free in Southern Nevada. You can only protest on sidewalks and anything else, and it requires permits, and they charge you obscene amounts of insurance. So there's just there's not a place for us to gather like there is many other places. We don't have a Powderhorn Park. If we tried to go there, we would get charged for it.
I absolutely love that people know where Powderhorn Park
I do
is in
too.
Minnesota now,
Yeah.
because that is such a colloquial place. If you say it, people know exactly, because there's a lot of cool sculptures and parks in the Powderhorn. It's a really cool neighborhood in Minneapolis, but it's fun to hear people from across the country refer to it.
Oh,
so.
exactly.
I had no idea about Nevada, though, about
Me
being
either.
charged
Yeah.
for.
So up in Reno, they had their last No Kings, or the one before, was like 18,000. They let them march the streets. Reno has more of a traditional town feel to it. They have public spaces where people gather. In Vegas, because you have the tourism, and I would also say because we are the site of the largest mass shooting in the United States history, they are very careful. And they overpolice us. So not only are we having it down there, I don't know how is where you live, but when I go to No Kings in downtown Vegas, they have their ride gear helmet on one hip, their gas mask on the other, and then a literal fistful of zip ties secured to their belt. And they're standing 10 feet apart the entire area. There's an officer every single 10 feet for our.
So I've only done one of the No Kings, and it was on a day because I have problems regulating my body temperature. So I can't with my disability. So I can only be out when the weather is hospitable to me. And we did not see one police officer until the very end of the march. The police presence there was next to nothing. Wouldn't you agree, Monica?
No, and I'm hearing Kae talk about the massive police presence in Las Vegas, and St. Paul at the Capitol in Minnesota had 200,000 on March 28th for the most recent No Kings, and I barely saw any police presence. And this is following Operation Metro Surge.
In a massive crowd. We get 6,000 or 7,000 for No Kings, and I didn't even know the number of officers. They had snipers on roofs, which was also highly intimidating. And I know, again, when you have hotels, and we obviously had a history as a city, which required maybe on the ground level felt intimidating. I don't know why they can't wait a block away for just in case. Like, why do we have to stand? And I'm not kidding when I say every 10, 15 feet, there was somebody to see them pulling up the zip ties and getting them prepped. So they have them locked in. So they're all looped up and they're ready to have them on their hip. That was really intimidating. And I don't take my kids down to those beaches for smaller little local things so they can be involved, or allow them to drive by, but I don't like them being there because it just feels almost oppressive to be there.
I wonder if the police presence is a little bit more discreet in Minnesota just because ever since George Floyd, there's such a complicated relationship between the police and the public in the Twin Cities. And I think they actually did a pretty good job between George Floyd and the protests of really rehabilitating that relationship with people. And the city really put a lot of time and energy and money into creating a positive relationship with the Minneapolis community, with the police department. And Monica, wouldn't you agree it's not the local police departments that are the issue? It's like the state troopers, because you were at that event at Whipple, right?
Yeah. It's the Hennepin County Sheriff Department and more than the local police. And the Minneapolis Police Department really did a lot with trying to rebuild community trust, but that has all been eroded now since Operation Metro Surge.
Yeah.
I just want to put a plug in for Shania Booth. I actually interviewed her. She's running for the Nevada State Assembly. I wrote an article in March and interviewed her as a local candidate. I did a whole article on local candidates. So Shania is running for Nevada State Assembly, and she did a great job quoting to me exactly why, especially in Nevada, it's really important for people to be paying attention to those elections. So I thought I would throw a shout out for her.
Absolutely. No, it is. And I feel like in Nevada, we also are, I think there's the most amount of BLM land in the entire nation. And so it is important for us to, on a state and then county and then city level, to be very big advocates, because like the data center here, they said, if your city won't let us do it, we'll just go put it on BLM land. And I was like, okay, so we need a statewide embargo. That is what you're telling me. And again, I think that we have to get involved at all levels. Yeah, I've been out campaigning for Joy Cooper. She's running for Congress in District 1, so that's in Southern Nevada. We have weird districts here, and I don't even understand how we're making this district, because I was like, why are we in the same district? I'm very confused how that happened. But she's running primary dean type, and so we'll been advocating for her, but there's a lot of great candidates here.
Let's stick with Nevada a little bit, but shift towards a little more fun. So the Sphere is a huge thing now in Vegas. And if you could pick absolutely any artist, band, performance, musical, whatever, to come to the Sphere, what are you going to choose?
I don't know. So here's the thing. If I'm not a huge music person, I would probably love to see some kind of a theater thing done there. I don't know what it would be.
Hamilton.
That would be fun. My daughter would love that. She is 10 years old, and I say that she looks like Tinkerbell. So imagine like a little Tinkerbell. But when she sings Hamilton, she leans into those curse words so hard. And you just be like, double never. And she'll say it like, I don't even get it. So it's lean in. It cracks me up. We would love that. That would be a great one. So yeah, I think a theater performance would really be fun. We also have a Smith Center, which does performing arts here. That's where our performing arts go. But yeah, the Sphere has become a new thing. More so for it's outside. They like to put lots of fun things. That's kind of weird. When you drive in, the Vegas Valley is a bowl. And so when you come in, you can see it from parts of it. And you randomly just see like a smiley face or out there in the distance.
That is so
I love
cool.
I love to fly over it. It's fun to see it from the air too.
So fun fact, I've never been to Las Vegas.
Oh,
I've never been to Nevada. I've been to Utah. I've been to California, Colorado. I've never made it to Vegas. So we're going to have to make a trip to go to the Sphere because I have a feeling I would I think I would find Las Vegas both fascinating and fun and overstimulating.
well, but
With all the
I would
lights
say
and the noise and stuff.
Overstimulating for
the
sure.
best parts of Vegas, I feel, are outside of Vegas. We have Red Rocks and we have the place called Valley of Fire that very much resembles Arches up in Utah. And
Mhm.
and off strip, there's lots of amazing little places to go. Or there's lots of great things throughout Nevada. But yeah, the locals avoid the strip like the plague. We're like, oh, we have to go down now.
Yeah.
We
It's kind of
avoid the
like
Mall
that
of
here.
America.
I was going to say, it's like the Mall of America here. Everyone's, oh, we're going to the Mall of America. We're like, oh my
No.
God.
Right.
I
We're
would like, we'll
not.
do anything possible to avoid going to the Mall of America.
Yeah.
You're actually talking about potentially moving, correct? You're looking at options. Do you want to share with our readers what's spurning that for or our listeners?
It's a question we have. One of the problems with Nevada, and it's due to its explosive growth that happened through the 90s, is in most states around the 1800s of the turn of the century, they set up a deaf school and inspired a deaf son. And so almost every state, except for 3 or 4, all of them happen to be Nevada and states, in Nevada, North Dakota, New Hampshire, don't have deaf schools. So we probably should have had one up in Carson or in Reno. That would have been the logical place, but they just never did it. And so one of the problems is there's been a lack of a deaf community, or there might be a deaf community, but there's often the deaf schools become their home base, and you will have a large community often around it. So we're looking to maybe go to where a deaf community would be for my son. You know, as he moves into adolescence, I want him to be able to have friendships and access to a community. I want him to be in a place where he can be rooted as a child and then rooted as an adult and have friendships and resources and all of the things that currently are like going deep to get for him. I actually homeschooled him not because that would have been my first choice, but because the educational system here became such that he wasn't progressing in school. They believed he would never, they believe in general, many people, that deaf children can't read beyond third grade reading level. And that wasn't acceptable to me. And we made the decision, we couldn't move at the time. So we made the decision to bring him home so that he could progress. So yeah, we're looking around and looking at our eye in the deaf community. We have certain places we won't go. So we have some things that we're looking for to be able to support him as he continues to grow. So that might be happening. He right now isn't a fan of it, but he has a hard time having change. And so we're like, let's do the research, visit all the schools, and let's go from there.
And I'm sure that feels a little political. I know there are people in states that are looking to get out of their states for various reasons. And it fits with what you were looking for to get to a different state for all kinds of reasons.
Well, and Nevada has atrocious education. We're at the bottom almost every time. And we also have very poor mental health and general health care, which again, I'm like, Las Vegas is a city of the valley. So the whole valley is 2.5 million people. And there was a time when we needed for one of my children a pediatric neuropsychologist, and we could not get into one for 2 years. Or we needed, and there was a point where we also needed a referral to, there was something else. Again, it was like, oh, it was genetic, like a 2-year waiting list. I was like, nobody should have to wait 2 years for that.
No.
But that's the state of healthcare here in Southern Nevada. And it's hot.
It's kind of the state of our healthcare in the whole country.
Yeah,
Our healthcare
everywhere.
system is really just so broken. Yeah.
Minnesota does actually a pretty good job with what they have. Of course, having our Medicaid funding cut is another story. But Monica just wrote an article about the cuts to funding for the Department of Education. And as a mom, I'm sure that your son will eventually have an IEP in school if he goes to public school. And an IEP is an individualized education plan. And what that entails is all of the accommodations and services your kid will get in school so that they can have equal footing. And that includes accessibility. So that would be your son getting an ASL interpreter in his classroom. I know you mentioned that he has no hearing at all, so they would not give him a listening device, but accessibility to those things are what that money goes towards, that the government just cut. So all of these children who are coming to school who may have the intellectual ability to succeed are now going to have an arm tied behind their back because they're not going to have equitable access to their education, so that they are equally able to access education where they are with their disability. And that just, I find it disgusting. It's disgusting.
Absolutely. No, he had the IEP. So before he left, he had a full IEP because he started in pre-K with that. And he did use the listening device. It helps a lot of times with grounding him in the space. But what part of the whole Department of Education has, one of them was to resources for deaf and blind children. And I'm like, I don't know why we need to be cutting things like interpreters and special education teachers and stuff for children. So, yeah, that was one of the cuts that did happen, I think, last year.
The proposed budget for 2027 takes out $2.3 billion for the Department of Education, which they're actively trying to dismantle. And as a recently retired teacher, I've just found that so infuriating. But then you couple it with the $1 billion for this ballroom that he has been saying since day one that it's going to be privately funded. It won't cost the taxpayers anything. And so we're going to put all of that away. And we're going to end on something fun because I think we all need to take a deep breath because I start talking about this stuff and I get so worked up. And so what is bringing you joy outside of politics?
We get to go for our summers. My husband's an educator. He's a teacher. And so we get summers off and we escape from the 120-degree inferno that our city becomes. And we get to go on a trip. So we are 3 weeks away from leaving for part of the summer. We get to go to Colorado and South Dakota and Oregon and California.
Oh, fun.
And we get to, my soul loves beautiful spaces and it loves the trees, and I get to go do that soon. So we'll be taking our little pop-up and going up to national parks and getting to have fun this summer. We don't get to see the redwoods are my favorite. So if you've never been to the coastal redwoods, they are the thing you need to see. As a person who has visited pretty much everything west of Oklahoma, I will 100% plug the coastal redwoods every single time. They're different than the rest of the redwoods, and they're amazing. And so I don't get to see those this summer, but I do get to go to Oregon, which is just gorgeous coastline. I get to go up, and I'm not seeing the Colorado Rockies, so I'm excited for that.
Love Colorado.
Yeah.
We've driven through them, but we haven't stopped and spent time in them, so I get to go do that. So that's bringing me to
Don't hold Christy and Monica against South Dakota. And Monica's from South Dakota because the Black Hills are beautiful, really beautiful part of the state.
I've been to them before. We're going back because we didn't feel like we had enough time last time. So we're headed back to the hills. And so, yeah, that's bringing me joy. And then also we've been having a lot of fun with my daughter's in Girl Scouts, and she's been having a lot of fun with that. So it's been neat to see. I was in Girl Scouts, and that's why I love camping. So to see her kind of being in that and to earn her badges and to be excited for all those things. It's been a lot of fun recently. So, yeah, it was a great picture.
Amazing.
Do you have any final thoughts or final words for us before we sign off?
I would say the one final thing I would say is that I always try to remind people to have hope. That people think, gosh, we haven't really changed a lot. Actually, we have changed a lot. There's been a lot of things that could have happened that were stopped. So we need to acknowledge that. But the arc of progress, especially when we're talking about a multi-system, massive shift that we want to see, that to a government that focuses more on working class than the billionaire class, it is time. It takes time. And we have seen steps forward. And one of the best things that gives me hope, I think, all the time, is that we have millions of people engaged. And I truly believe we do not have a numbers problem. We need to focus on strategy at this phase. And we have the people. We have a lot of structure. We have a lot of trained people who are ready to go. And so it is now a game of perseverance and strategy. And I think those are both things that we can tackle. So I have hope because I truly believe there are more of us. And I truly believe that we have the organizing and the time and the skills behind this to do great things.
Yes. And tell everyone where they can find We the People Dissent so they can follow your
Sure.
work too. And we'll put it in the show
Sure.
notes.
So I have a website, wethepeopledissent.net, but I'm mostly on Substack. Go there and look for We the People Dissent. Look under Kae Starling if that helps, just in case somebody else has a similar name and you're like, I can't find it. I'm also on, I post a lot, probably a little excessively, on Threads.
Same.
Threads, I have, if you want my short and fast thoughts on things, that's where I am, and that's under author Kae Starling. I kept that for when I was writing. It feels like I couldn't change it once I had it. So I'm over there, and those are all places you can find me at.
Perfect.
Thanks for all you do and for keeping people organized. And the engagement is so important right now. And thank you for coming in and having a conversation with us. This was great.
Thank you for having me. I was
It was
excited
so
to be
fun.
here this afternoon.
You're an honorary chick now.
To our listeners, if you're finding meaning and in the stories that we're sharing, if something moves you, challenges you, makes you see the world a little differently, please like, comment, and share. It helps more than you know.
And follow us everywhere at The Politics Chicks on Substack, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.
Thanks for being a part of our community, and keep shining your light so we can find each other in the dark.
And remember that we're stronger together. Thanks so much for being here today, Kae. It was an amazing conversation, and you need to come back because we need to hear updates on what you're doing.
That would be great.
Thanks, Kae.
Clear.
Thanks.
Bye, y'all.